Well, greetings from the Asia Society in New York. I'm Kevin Rudd. I'm President and CEO, also President of the Asia Society Policy Institute, our think and do tank, where a lot of our attention is focused on the future of US-China relations. That's why I'm pleased that our Northern California Centre, under the able leadership of both Margaret and Ken, have brought together this important conference on the future of US-China relations. I see also that on our conference program we have contributions both from Henry Kissinger and George Shultz. I'm pleased to count Henry Kissinger as a friend and as a colleague. Not only is he a distinguished American, of course he is a distinguished global statesman. And in 2021 we will celebrate 50 years since Henry's path-breaking secret diplomacy towards Beijing back in 1971. Needless to say, a lot has happened in 50 years. And as for George Shultz, another distinguished American and distinguished statesman, I remember well when, as Foreign Minister of Australia, I presented George with an order of the membership of the Order of Australia, an honorary membership which we extend to foreign nationals. And that's because of George's extraordinary contribution to not just international diplomacy, but the diplomacy of the Asia-Pacific, and of course, from an Australian perspective, his engagement with our country over such a long period of time. And it's been my privilege and pleasure to spend time with him since then in my new Asia Society capacity at Stanford University, where he continues to exert an influence on future policy debates for the United States of America. The subject which I have been given to address today is what now for the global chessboard? What now for the future of US-China relations? So in the next 15 or 20 minutes, I'd like to set out doing two or three things. One, speak about what is likely to be Xi Jinping's approach to the Biden administration. Two, what the Biden administration may have as its own national strategy towards Xi Jinping's China. And three, is there a possibility of some form of restabilization of the relationship through what I often describe as a joint strategic framework, or what I've just written elsewhere as meaning an approach entitled managed strategic competition. To begin with, when we look at Xi Jinping's view of the world and his view of the United States in particular, there are two animating principles for the exercise of Chinese authority and influence in the world today, including in relation to the United States. One of those, of course, is the changing nature of the balance of power, which Xi Jinping has interpreted as moving decisively, increasingly decisively, in China's direction, both economically, technologically, and militarily. And the 2020s looms as a critical decade where many of those indicators will move, in his view, more decisively in China's direction. And the second animating factor in causing changes in Chinese policy behaviour, both now and in the decade which lies ahead, is Xi Jinping's own leadership style. Xi Jinping is not a cautious, conservative Chinese political leader of the old school. He's prepared to take risks, he's prepared to push the envelope, he's prepared to occupy vacuums when he has identified those as having been presented or created by any American withdrawal from one part of the world or the other, or one part of the global architecture or the other. And we've certainly seen evidence of that over the last 4 years of the Trump administration. So when we seek to analyse how Xi Jinping will approach the Biden administration, we need to be very clear about these two fundamental driving forces which are animating the direction of China's foreign policy, its strategic policy, its international economic policy, as well as, frankly, its domestic economic policy settings and its domestic politics. So therefore, based on those assumptions, how do we anticipate Xi Jinping will approach the new Biden administration? First, I think, consistent with previous Chinese administrations, there'll be a long strategic pause of some several months as the Chinese administration seeks to form an assessment as to what substantive as opposed to rhetorical changes will be brought about under Biden towards China. The Chinese, since Henry Kissinger's first visit, have been keen students of US presidential politics. They understand loud and clear the difference between what candidates say in the context of a US presidential election race and what then is translated through in the real policies of an administration. And rightly or wrongly, what the Chinese have deduced over the last 50 years is there is a considerable gap between the two. Also, the Chinese system, populated by a hardy breed of Marxist-Leninists, will take a very long, hard, materialist view as to what materially changes in US actual operational behaviour towards China under the Biden administration. For example, what will the United States now do as far as its operational patterns of behaviour in the South China Sea and across the Taiwan Straits? What will the new administration do as far as future levels of official contact with Taipei be concerned? What will now happen in terms of US foreign policy directions on critical questions such as human rights, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, and more broadly? Thirdly, they'll be observing carefully what happens now with the future of the bilateral trade deal between the Trump administration and Xi Jinping's China. Will there be a phase 2 negotiation, or will there not be? And on top of that, will the current tariff regime remain in place? And beyond that, the beginnings of the imposition of a range of restrictions and sanctions on the finance sector, the listing of Chinese corporations on US stock exchanges, and a range of other foreshadowed restrictions concerning the investment patterns of American pension funds in Chinese equities. And of course, on top of all of that, there'll be an assessment of what happens in technology markets as well. Will there be a change on this front, or will there not be a change? Will the fundamental disputes which arose between the United States and Huawei during the period of the Trump administration continue and expand, or will they not? The reason I go through this list at some length is to make it plain that from Xi Jinping's perspective and those who advise him, their razor-sharp lens will be on what materially changes in each of these domains, and much less so what the United States says in its own domestic political debate may be changing or may change further in the future. That, I think, is principle number one. Principle number two for Xi Jinping's approach to the Biden administration will be how, in fact, to handle the most fundamentally sensitive question of all, which is the future of Taiwan. I touched on this before. The Trump administration began to tread on very dangerous ground by opening up a much wider range of official contact between the United States government and the government of Tsai Ing-wen in Taipei. We've seen this, of course, through official visits by US cabinet secretaries to Taiwan. We have seen it in a range of other domains as well. And so the number one concern on the part of Xi Jinping's administration will be how does it induce the Biden administration into adopting a posture on the One China policy which is more consistent with what we've seen in the past. Third, the administration of Xi Jinping, as far as Biden is concerned, will take an overall long-term view that the overall structure of the US-China relationship is unlikely to change a lot. And what that means is that they will seek to ensure that China is as prepared as possible to avoid any unnecessary damage to their own national interests as a consequence of a continuation of those already existing policy directions. So in concrete terms, what does that mean? If we look carefully at what Xi Jinping has done on economic policy, on economic policy with the enunciation during the course of 2020 of his so-called dual circulation economy. What he means by that is an economy where, in the future, they will seek to have the main drivers of China's future economic growth come from China's domestic consumer demand, rather than what will necessarily be earned from net exports abroad, including its number one export market, the United States. But of course, Xi Jinping's so-called dual circulation economy is a much broader concept as well. In fact, it's code language for various forms of national self-reliance. Self-reliance in terms of being less dependent on foreign exports, as I just said, but also less reliance on foreign countries for the critical supply of essential inputs to the Chinese industrial process. And of course, the poster child for all that is what then happens on the future of China's own high-tech future. This is critically important for China's future because it goes down to the essential world of microchips. And can China be self-reliant in microchips in the future? This, of course, is of direct relevance to the future of the semiconductor industry in the United States, and that is particularly relevant to your part of the world in California and in Silicon Valley. But Xi Jinping's overall perspective is that greater national self-reliance across all economic categories, most particularly high technology, is necessary against what they judge to be a long-term structural deterioration in the US-China relationship. There's one other factor I'll mention as well in terms of Xi Jinping's overall strategy, and that is, as he anticipates that the structural relationship with the United States, particularly on economic engagement, will get worse, at the same time, Xi Jinping will be seeking to maximise new economic openings in the rest of Asia and new economic openings in Europe and the other major markets of the world. So that's why we have seen a flurry of activity from Beijing in the development of the RCEP free trade arrangement with 15 East Asian economies towards the end of 2020. And then on New Year's Eve, the remarkable announcement of a new bilateral investment agreement between China and the European Union, although the latter still has to negotiate its way through the ratification processes of the European Parliament, and that may be far from smooth. But the reason I mention those at this stage is because these underline the extent to which Xi Jinping is seeking to insulate China in its access to export markets, investment markets, capital markets, and technology markets, and even talent markets, to insulate his country from what they anticipate will be an increasingly negative trend in the US-China relationship by opening up China's market opportunities to the rest of the world, including the rest of the developed world. One final point about Xi Jinping's strategy is this. Xi Jinping's strategy, as we've seen recently in terms of the punitive economic measures taken against Australia, and recently other punitive measures against countries like Canada, Japan, South Korea, and in Europe, Sweden, Norway, much earlier on the Netherlands, is that China's overall strategy will continue to be to send a loud message across the world that if any individual country less powerful than China dares to cross China's national interests, by articulating a foreign policy direction or a human rights direction or an economic policy direction or a strategic posture vis-à-vis the South China Sea, which is in conflict with China's own national strategy, then China will have no qualms whatsoever about leveraging its economic power in order to send a clear message to that country and to other countries around the world. The Chinese Chengyu, or four-character phrase, is 杀一儆百, kill one to warn 100, and that's very much at work. Of course, at the end of the day, China still will have to prosecute a strategy which receives a level of acceptance on the part of its neighbouring states and across the principal institutions of global political and economic and climate change governance. And that's where I should conclude. For national reasons in China itself, China will also wish to open up lines of climate change policy dialogue with the new Biden administration, as they have sustained and are now intensifying with the Europeans. And therefore, a challenge for the Biden administration will be how to engage this climate change track with China on the one hand, while recognising in the other tracks of the relationship there will be a much more competitive and in some areas adversarial relationship. So therefore, there are some reflections on Xi Jinping's overall strategy towards the Biden administration. Now, what about the Biden response? Far be it from me to speak on behalf of the incoming administration. I have no brief to do so, and it's very early days yet. But here are a couple of quick observations. Number one, the Biden administration, I believe, will be aware that for the first time the United States of America needs a coherent and to the greatest extent possible bipartisan national China strategy, which incorporates all elements of American national power. Not just classical foreign policy, not just the usual positions taken on human rights, but across strategic policy including the military, technology, the economy, trade, investment, and the rest. Number two, the Biden administration is also likely to be aware of the fact that because of the changing nature of the balance of power between the US and China, including in East Asia and the West Pacific, that for the first time since 1945, America will fundamentally need its principal allies, both in Asia and Europe, to maintain a balance of power advantage in relation to China, rather than simply seeing its allies as an occasional encumbrance or something which may be seen to be superficially diplomatically useful, and what's always been described in diplomacy as a full flags exercise. That won't work anymore. China at present is on track to become a larger economy in GDP measured in market exchange rate terms by 2028. That's only 8 years from now. The COVID factor and the COVID recovery timetables of both countries has accelerated that crossover point. So in pure economic terms, before you go to the subcomponents of trade volume, investment volume and intensity and direction, technology capabilities, etc., as well as capital markets, currency markets, the United States will need to craft a national China strategy which becomes the basis for a pan-allied strategy with its principal allies in Asia and in Europe. That does not mean with every country, and when I say principal allies, that's likely to be where it goes. In Asia, countries like, obviously, Japan, the Republic of Korea and Australia, possibly India, though it is not a treaty ally, but becoming closer strategically to the United States. And in Europe, countries like, obviously, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, even the European Union itself, Canada in North America, and if we are casting the net wider beyond formal treaty allies, then to countries like Mexico, Indonesia and India I've already mentioned. The question of Africa also looms large. A third element of a Biden strategy towards dealing with China will be how to deal with the Chinese strategy of isolating and punishing individual allies. At present, Australia is the poster child for this, but it will soon pass to other countries as well. And this will become a fundamental test and challenge for the Biden administration in how it goes about conveying the message to Beijing that it is not going to stand idly by while its treaty allies are treated in such a manner. Fourth, as I indicated before, Joe Biden and the Democrats are deeply committed to the future of climate change action. And you cannot achieve progress on climate change unless the world's two largest emitters, China and the United States, are not just talking with each other, but negotiating with each other and creating the critical leverage necessary to achieve a wider global outcome in terms of the level of greenhouse gas emissions to be achieved globally, as well as the national actions which need to underpin that. I believe, therefore, there will be a possibility within the framework of continued collaboration with Beijing for there to be an active climate change dialogue between the two capitals beyond the superficial. In fact, prior to this most recent election, we at the Asia Society have been intimately involved in those dialogues between the Chinese and the Americans about what could happen in the future. So there are some quick reflections on how the Biden administration may respond to Xi Jinping's China. Finally, let me conclude with this. Are we simply spiralling towards a future direction which is one of ever-intensifying strategic competition with the ever-present risk of that escalating into crisis, conflict or even war? Or is there a different approach? I'm very mindful of the presence at this particular conference of genuinely wise men, Henry Kissinger and George Shultz, who are old enough and experienced enough to remember acutely the lessons from the Cold War against the Soviet Union. We're not in a Cold War with China and perish the thought that we will end up in one. But one of the lessons from the Cold War was how, after the near-death experience of the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 1960s, both countries decided to have about them a mutually agreed set of strategic understandings which prevented these countries from sliding into the nuclear abyss during the rest of the 60s, the 70s and the 80s. Therefore, the relationship now between China and the United States is nowhere as fundamentally adversarial as what we had between the then Soviet Union and the United States. There are vast differences between that Cold War and what we now have with China, not least because of the high degree of economic interdependence between Beijing and Washington still. But there is a place for high diplomacy to deliver what I describe as a framework of managed strategic competition, a joint strategic framework. What do I mean by that? An understanding between the two capitals about what the fundamental red lines in each capital really are, both on Taiwan, the South China Sea, and elsewhere, including the future of cybersecurity as well. It's important that there is a high degree of clarification as to what those red lines are in the private diplomatic domain, so that if they are breached, the other side will know that consequences will flow. Second, that opens up a vast area of potentiality for, let's call it, managed strategic competition across foreign policy, across the economy, trade, investment, technology and the rest, and the great global competition for ideas between China's form of authoritarian capitalism versus the liberal democratic norms which are fundamental to the United States and the other liberal democracies of the world today. And therefore, in the midst of that strategic competition, both in the economy and in politics and in foreign policy, as well as in technology and basic questions of ideology, may the best man or woman win. As the Chinese would say, let 100 flowers bloom and 100 schools of thought contend. And finally, within this framework of strategic competition or managed strategic competition, there is also room and space for collaboration and cooperation in areas like climate change, in areas like pandemic management, in areas like global financial market stability, particularly given the likely impact of the flow-through of high levels of public sector and private sector debt onto global debt markets and the need, therefore, to ensure longer-term global financial stability. Myself, having been in office during the last global financial crisis, I know how easily and quickly it is for these things to manifest and how critical it is to have effective global machinery through the G20, for example, to ensure that we do not tip into a financial crisis abyss. So there are three sets of reflections. One about what is likely to be the core elements of Xi Jinping's approach to the incoming Biden administration during the course of 2021. A few reflections on how Biden may seek to respond, and an argument towards both capitals based on work I've done in the past and have circulated to both governments on this concept of a joint strategic framework, a framework of managed strategic competition, which enables there to be a vigorous, competitive and at times cooperative relationship, but without running the daily risk of sliding into escalation, crisis, conflict and war. I thank you for your time.